Story 1, Unborn Baby. There was a girl named Elena who was interested in the paranormal. She and her friends would get together every day after school to play with a Ouija board. They would spend all afternoon trying to contact spirits. It was just something to do to pass the time. They asked all kinds of questions, but didn't take any of it very seriously. That was until they contacted one very peculiar spirit. It was a normal afternoon, and Elena and her friends were gathered around the Ouija board. "Is anybody there?" they kept asking. Eventually, the planchette moved to yes. "Who is this?" they asked. The planchette spelled out the name, Eerie. "How old are you?" they asked. The planchette didn't move. They went on asking questions, and eventually figured out that they were talking to the spirit of a baby that hadn't been born yet. The spirit claimed it would be born in a few months. The girls were fascinated by this. They decided they were talking to an unborn child, an angel they called her. They continued contacting Anna every day. They asked question after question and learned so much about her. She revealed the names of her future parents, the hospital where they would give birth, and even the date on which she was going to be born. Then, suddenly, one afternoon, they couldn't contact her. "Anna, are you there?" They kept asking, but there was no answer. Then, the day came when A&A told them she would be born. They gathered around the Ouija board and asked, "A&A, are you there?" The planchette slowly moved to yes. The girls were so excited they could barely contain themselves. They asked what had happened to her, where she had been. The answer left them shivering. "I was punished." Worried, Elena was quick to ask why, telling things. At this point, with tears in her eyes, when Elena's friends asked what happened, what was the punishment? The planchette took its time to move again. "I will not be born." No one could speak. No one could move. The planchette moved slowly across the board and spelled out one last sentence. "Do not play." The girls were crying. They kept trying to contact A&A again, but she just wasn't there anymore. The next day, they all went down to the hospital where Anna was supposed to be born and asked a nurse about Anna's mother. "Let me check," said the nurse. "She's resting in her room." "Are you family?" "No, just friends." "Well, I'm sorry. She has to rest, and only family members are allowed in to see her." "We just want to see the baby," the girls insisted. "Just for a second. We won't disturb anyone." "Oh, well, I'm so sorry to tell you this." The nurse said, "But there were complications during the labor." "I'm so sorry, but the baby was dead." The girls went home and burned the Ouija board that very afternoon. They never played again. Story 2, Babysitter. There was a young girl who was in need of a job who was able to find work as a babysitter for a couple who lived in a large, isolated, old house. They were going out to see a movie that night and left the teenage babysitter in charge of their 3 young children. The babysitter put the children to bed when it got late and then went downstairs to watch some television. She was just getting comfortable when she heard the phone ringing. When she answered it, all she heard was heavy breathing followed by a man's voice asking, "Have you checked on the children?" Freaked out, she hung up the phone, trying to convince herself that it was just someone playing a practical joke on her. She went back to watching television, but about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. She picked up the receiver and heard hysterical laughter from the other end of the line. Then the same voice asked, "Why haven't you checked on the children?" The babysitter slammed down the phone. The poor girl was frightened out of her wits and immediately called the police. The operator at the police station told the babysitter that if the man called again, she should try to keep him talking. That would give the police time to trace the call. A few minutes later, the phone rang a third time, and when the babysitter answered it, she heard the heavy breathing again. The voice on the line said, "You should really check on the children." The babysitter listened to him laughing hysterically for a long time. She hung up the phone again, and almost immediately, it rang again. This time it was the operator from the police station who yelled, "Get out of the house right now. The calls are coming from the upstairs phone." The babysitter dropped the phone in shock, and suddenly she heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. Without pausing for a second, she ran out of the house as fast as her legs would carry her. Just as she closed the front door behind her, A man's hand slammed against the glass. She screamed and ran out into the street just as a police car was pulling up outside. The police searched the house and found the 2 children upstairs, hiding in a closet, crying uncontrollably. In the parents' bedroom, they found a bloody axe lying on the floor next to the upstairs phone. The back window was wide open, and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. There was no sign of the madman who had made the phone calls. He had escaped into the night when the police arrived and managed to interrupt his horrible plan to kill the 2 children and the poor babysitter. Story 3: Woman in the Toilet. This is the story of what happened to me just 2 nights ago. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. It was getting late, and I decided to take a nice relaxing bath before going to bed. I needed to go to the toilet first. When I lifted the lid of the toilet, I thought I saw something in the toilet bowl. It looked like the shadow of a person's head. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to the dim light. I realized it was the head of an old woman. Her eyes were closed and her hair was spread out and hanging over the sides of the toilet bowl like seaweed. At first, I was too shocked to do anything. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I just stood there in my underwear staring down at it. How could anyone fit inside a toilet bowl? Was it a severed head? Was it a Halloween prop? All of a sudden, the woman's eyes opened wide, and she stared up at me. I was horrified. In shock, I slammed down the toilet lid. I could hear a gurgling sound coming from under the lid. It sounded like muffled laughter. In a panic, I grabbed basins, brushes, and shampoo bottles and plied them on top of the toilet lid, trying to keep it trapped. Then I ran out of the bathroom and closed the door. I heard noises from the other side of the bathroom door. It sounded like it was bumping against the toilet lid. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't human. I was so scared that I ran out of the apartment wearing just my t-shirt and underpants. I ran downstairs, got a taxi, and raced over to the home of my female friend who lived nearby. I told her what I had seen, but she didn't seem to believe me. When I calmed down, I even began to question myself. I stayed with her for a few hours, but around midnight, I decided to go back to my apartment, and I asked her to come with me. When I turned the key in the lock and opened the door, the apartment seemed quiet and nothing was out of place. My friend was curious to see what had scared me. She opened the door of the bathroom. Everything was silent. All of the things I had piled on the toilet lid had fallen on the floor. My friend lifted the toilet seat and peered inside. There was nothing there. No woman, not even a stray hair. She shut the lid again. I was still creeped out, so I asked my friend to stay for a while, just in case. Then I noticed something nasty. It made me sick to my stomach. Protruding from under the rim of the toilet were some tufts of long, wet hair. My friend noticed them too. She reached out cautiously and opened the lid of the toilet. The old woman's face was there, staring up at her. She opened her mouth and began gnashing her teeth. Clack, clack, clack. In a high-pitched voice, she started laughing. As she laughed, her wrinkled skin shook and jiggled. Her black hair shifted and moved like hundreds of tiny snakes. My friend let out a scream and slammed the lid shut, holding it down with one hand. She reached out and pulled the lever with her other hand. There was a swirl of water, and the jarring laughter was drowned out by the sound of the toilet flushing. We waited, afraid to breathe. The flushing sound stopped, and the water started trickling back into the cistern. My friend opened the lid again. The toilet bowl was empty. We were both shaking. She left the lid open and told me not to close it ever. My friend decided to go home, leaving me alone in the apartment. I slept in the hallway outside the toilet, clutching a knife. The next day, I unscrewed the toilet lid and took it off. Ever since then, I have been too afraid to go to the toilet. I am terrified that I will sit down on the bowl to do my business, and when I am finished, I will look down and see that woman's gnarled and wrinkled face staring up at me.